because I think as we mature as an organization, we have to recognize that for different people, safety looks, it's not the same. It's not generic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Safe Spaces. I am Kate Murden, and I am the CEO of Push, and I'm so happy to see you all here. So welcome to this new series of Safe Spaces, where we ask leaders and other high-profile favourite talent of ours to let us into their safe space and help us to understand exactly how to better to create them both at work and at home, which is something that my company at Push is something we're very, very keen to be doing. So a safe space is much more than just a physical space. It can happen anywhere at any time between people. And it's the kind of place where people can connect, and it allows people to ask the right questions and to feel really comfortable sharing. And as I said, it's exactly the thing that we are on a mission to create at Push. The reason being is we genuinely think that that's what's going to make life at work better, if not life on the whole better as well. So without further ado, I would love to welcome our guest today, the brilliant Karen Aitchison, who is the Global Head of Wellbeing over at ERM. Now, ERM are a massive global company who are a pure play sustainability consultancy, and they partner with some of the biggest brands and organizations in the world to create innovative solutions to sustainability challenges and unlock commercial opportunities for them whilst thinking about future generations as well. So it's huge, and blimey, oh how well-being must play a part in that, not only obviously for the businesses themselves but for their clients. So it's very exciting to see you today, Karen. How are you? Well, look, I mean, I would love to, you and I talk about this stuff so much in terms of safe spaces and the importance of it. What does the term safe space mean to you? And I suppose I'm asking that on two levels. For you as a human, but also, I suppose, within the business. Let's talk about you as a human, first and foremost.
Gosh, I think for me, it's about connection, but not just finding common ground in a kind of abstract way. There's something about the presence of another person and how comfortable I feel in my own body is the way I kind of start to know I'm feeling safe. So there's a lot of, for me, and I appreciate it's not easy for everybody, but I personally can sustain and enjoy eye contact. There's something about that face heart dynamic for me that tells me that I'm safe with you,
Yeah,
that's what it means for me, I think.
So if you're having eye contact with someone, then that for you is a reassuring thing, that calms your nervous system, as it were.
Kind of, I think it's that I can sustain it. Like I'm not looking away, that there's something about their face invites me to feel connected with them. And I hope I can do the same, but there's definitely something in that face heart dynamic for me. Yeah.
How interesting then. I mean, has that been affected since the pandemic? As in, do you feel more challenged with it doing it virtually?
It's a very good point. I do, but I've checked it out, and apparently our nervous systems can still be in contact even like this.
Really?
Yeah, but I think that's why in organizations there's been a lot of emphasis on like cameras on where possible.
Yes,
because
wholeheartedly.
A lot of our communication is nonverbal. So for me, like I just watched you do this before, and that, I know that means you've got passion about this topic. Like I can pick up nonverbal communication through that. So for me personally, I find it more challenging when cameras are off, although I understand that internet and all sorts of things.
Oh, I can't bear it. Honestly, it drives me mental. And like if I'm doing a talk, for example, it drives me crazy if people don't have their cameras on. It's just like I really struggle with that, and it's just like that you can't form that connection. Of course you can't. Okay, so look, I understand what you're saying there, and I'm really interested in one of the bits that you talked about there in terms of the mind-body connection as well. Which I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize. How much we feel in our bodies. So could you explain a little bit about that explain a little bit about that to people listening in?
Well, I think probably the language around mental health has become this concept of mental, it's all going on up here, but our brain and our nervous system are in constant communication with each other. So safety for me is noticing my heart rate, noticing my breathing, like where am I breathing from? And if I'm breathing from deep in the belly, I kind of know that tells me I'm a bit safer. If I'm shallow breathing, then I'm probably quite nervous. So many of the people listening will have presumably been in front of a group of people speaking at some point and notice a dry throat, or their breathing's, the pace of their breathing is quicker. And I think that there's a wonderful book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Holds the Score, and there's a whole movement now around recognizing that many of the signs and symptoms of our mental health declining actually come from the body. And so I just think it's important that we don't keep separating the two. This dualism around mind and body. We're always in communication, and what I love is the fact that our nervous systems are in communication with other people. That's amazing to me.
I mean, I think it's super interesting, actually. It's the way that, I mean, for me personally, over the last couple of years, it's something I've become increasingly aware of, and really understanding the impact that or understanding the connection between the two. Like now at the moment, like I've had quite a lot going on today. I'm not feeling particularly well, so I can feel it all here in my body. And the thing is that when you start feeling that, your brain immediately starts looking for those signs, and it's just like, well, what's going on? Oh God, I don't feel well. So it's actually about getting back into your body rather than necessarily listening to your brain, and actually dealing with kind of what's going on here. But then of course it's the other way, as you said, with your body holds the score, and actually whatever is going on with our brain, and if we do have those stresses, immediately it can come out in terms of how we're feeling. It can then have an impact on our body, hence the reason we have so many lifestyle illnesses as well, so one of the reasons that we certainly do. So it's really interesting that we in my opinion, we must get a lot better at understanding that, so we can take care of both elements.
I mean, I think any human being who's overwhelmed, and essentially that's kind of what we're talking about at the moment, there's manifestations, and I think there's a tendency to overemphasize the cognitive, like the thinking part of that. And I get that, because I know myself, I can become quite erratic in my thinking, particularly if I'm feeling stressed. But there's behavioral, emotional, physical manifestations as well, and I think it's really important that we think about it in a rounder way, for sure.
No, I get it. Talk to me about ERM, and well, not just within them, but like, how do, in your opinion, how do you create safe spaces that work? Like, what's your role there? I suppose, what's your role within the role that you do, but more specifically, do you as an individual, how do you create safe spaces with the people that you work with?
Well, one, I'd like to think that I do, but I can't be the judge of that. And
being someone that works with you, I can honestly say that you do.
I think it's so individual though, and I think there's a lot of nuance to that, to the answer, because I think as we mature as an organization, we have to recognize that for different people, safety looks, it's not the same, it's not generic. So some of the ways that I will try and create safety is to really acknowledge lived experience in any meetings that we have, particularly where it's sensitive topics. So I do quite a bit in this sort of DEIB space, and for me that recognizing the lens through which we all see life is different, and recognizing that lived experience for me trumps any theory out there. So if someone disagrees with me in what I'm saying intellectually, I will always defer to the lived experience rather than my wedded to my theory or whatever it might be. So I think there's that. I think psychological safety is a term that's talked about a lot, and going back to what we were saying at the beginning, I feel like we're not paying enough attention to the physical sense of safety, the cues of and looking at things like status, who holds the power in the room, all of those things are going to start to have an impact on how people are going to feel able to speak up or not. So I try to name things. My training in Gestalt therapy is very heavy on naming. So you name it, you tame it type of thing. But I think when we name the differences between us, it creates more of a connection actually. Whereas if they go unspoken, for example, if I'm running a session where there are people of color, I don't know that experience.
Of course, of course.
And if I name it and I try and say, you know, to the extent I can, we will work with the difference of those experiences. Then at least it's not silent. It's not being named. That's kind of where I try to do my best.
Yeah, I mean that then is a little bit of an evolution, isn't it? Of the naming, I think is really important, because it does then, everyone then has an awareness of it, right? It's rather, you know, there's something so important in things not going unsaid. You know, resentments are of course unspoken truths, you know. So for me, there's something in how do you feel that talking helps not only you but others as well? Well, would you say first and foremost that talking and naming helps you? And do you see that it helps others as well?
Yeah, I think yes to both. I mean, I do a lot of facilitation, and that naming piece and really spending some time. I mean, I appreciate businesses they run at pace, you know, but I think where there's particularly challenging agenda items or there's a challenging issue, to just invest that little bit more time in naming what people might be bringing into the room. You know, we go so fast now that we may have come from a difficult meeting and then we arrive in a new one and we're expected to kind of be present. Even just saying, what do we need to let go of in order to become present is a nice way of inviting people into the room. But I also think that investment in time of just noticing difference, noticing, you know, there's a lot of people will say, don't worry, you're in a safe space. You know, or you're amongst friends, you know, that's another common one. Feel free to speak. But there is a fear of consequence. There is a fear of repercussion often in organizational life. And I think that when a leader is able to name that as a concern people may have, it suddenly opens up a whole new narrative. As opposed to, like you say, it doesn't get said, then people are walking out the room not quite knowing whether what they've said was maybe inappropriate, or they may be worrying about that.
But that requires this, you know, this is so interesting to me, because I think that what that says to me, you know, we often get asked, what is the one thing you could do within a business that will improve how it's working? Like there's some kind of silver bullet. And I actually think there is, and that's communication skills. And that is communication skills for everyone. You know, the ability, first of all, the self-awareness to recognize how you're really feeling. Then I think something around the ability to communicate that confidently and courageously and calmly but then also to be able to receive back and not fear what others will say as well. So there's three parts to that. And I think that what we're talking about there is probably a huge shift change in leaders, because, you know, for all of their brilliance as leaders, and I'm making some bloody big sweeping generalizations here, but not all leaders have the ability to do that, because that for me is a deep emotional intelligence, you know, and an emotional awareness and an emotional and an ability to communicate all of that. Would you agree?
I would. And I also have some sympathy though for those leaders who struggle with this, because I don't think we invest enough time really in helping people understand themselves. And also understanding their impact on others. So I know, like Daniel Goleman did the whole EQ stuff that you've kind of referenced there. And I think we're moving back into a place where those components of leadership are becoming even more important. And there's no doubt that organizations employ clever people and they're technically able, but I think EQ used appropriately, not just as a nice tick in the box quality, is what people are looking for. They're looking for people who are willing to connect to their own experience and to be able to extend that to other people. So I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And but and that's the thing, isn't it? And often we don't put enough emphasis or prioritize things like this because it's getting in the way of the business itself. You know, the business is a beast, right? Is a beast within itself, and and it's something that we're very comfortable focusing on. Doing the people stuff is the harder bit, and the bit that's a lot more uncomfortable. So you know, it requires a different set of skills and a lot of energy to be able to focus upon it. You know, and some people just have no interest in that. I mean, I wonder then if there is something in the pitching of it, for want of a better way of putting it, you know, so that actually leaders were to realize the value that it could bring to them ultimately and to their business, rather than feeling like it's the softer stuff, which literally makes my tummy turn when I hear things like that, because it's not the soft stuff, right? It's the stuff that genuinely makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I can only speak for my own organization, but I see a massive shift in that over the last, I don't know, 5 years even, pre-pandemic, but certainly post-pandemic, where our investment in learning and development and really looking at leadership as a more holistic competency is definitely, we've been investing in that a lot. And I agree, there are some people who perhaps find it more challenging, and ultimately maybe that's not their sweet spot. But I think, you know, then we have to be mature enough to say, well, we can't have leaders who are hurting people. You know, we have to, it doesn't make them a bad person, it just means it's not their strength. But I do think that the leaders of the future, like we keep hearing this phrase, the future of work, I think it will be challenging for leaders who don't have emotional intelligence to succeed in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me ask you a question then on that note. I'd like to talk about vulnerability, because it's a much, you know, everyone talks about vulnerability. Oh, you must be more vulnerable, and you know, and listen, of course, you know, I'm a huge believer in that. I'm a huge believer in vulnerability being a strength. Do we think it is for leaders? Like, you know, where is the line? Right? Because, you know, do you want a leader who's deeply vulnerable? Do you want someone who's, you know, because when does that vulnerability become a weakness? You know, and look, I'm asking a massive question there. So I'm asking as an opinion more than anything else. I suppose is it about using it more as a connector?
I think context is important for vulnerability. I think that one of the things that we were talking about when we met was the power of narrative and stories. The way that human brains sort of learn through storytelling is incredibly well researched. So I think that connecting and context are critical. I think that if a leader was 100% vulnerable, then there may be a suggestion that they, you know, are they capable of making big decisions? Are they capable of bringing that logical, analytical part of their brain to the table, which is needed? And I think that anytime I've witnessed leaders being vulnerable, the impact has been immense. But I think there's a time and a place for it.
I think that's a really, really, really good way of putting it. You know, you don't. I once went on a coaching course that was all about vulnerability, and I mean, the irony is the coach that was leading it was so vulnerable that in the end it just felt unmanageable. You know, that, you know, it felt, I started feeling not safe. So I think you're right. I think there's something in the context is what sets the scene for that, you know, and working out what isn't okay, what isn't okay. On which note, is it in your opinion, is it an okay thing to show emotion at work?
Well, which ones?
Yes.
Many of them?
Yes. I mean, a very good question back. All of them. I mean, I'm happy to go first on this. I think it's okay. I'm a really big believer in taking care of your side of the street. You know, we can't control what happens out there, but we can control how we react to it, etc. But we are all human, and I think sometimes, whilst one can do everything that they can to take care of a response, sometimes those emotions that are going to come out, reactionary emotions are going to come out, and then it's about quickly taking care of that side of the street, right? And understanding your role in that. So I think my personal view is it is responsiveness versus reaction is better, but it is okay as long as you're then aware of it, the consequence it might have.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't disagree with that. I think one of the things that leaders could learn to do more is repair any ruptures that do happen. I think there can be a tendency to, and I think like shame's in there somewhere. There's something shaming in getting it wrong or feeling as though we've crossed a line that we would normally not cross. I think anger, I guess, like I've been doing a lot of work on my own anger, or lack of, I should say, and really curious about why I struggle with anger. And I think that every emotion that we have as a human being is there for a reason. And I think we suppress emotions too much. I don't think that's healthy either. So I'm going back to my idea of safety, and, you know, if I was really angry, is that an appropriate way for me to show up? Probably not. I think I can be assertive and I can be clear, but if I lost it, I think my main concern would then be, how do I repair the rupture that I may have, you know, created between myself and a team, or myself and another person? Do I think sadness has a place at work? Yes, I do. Do I think that we don't do enough to support people who are grieving? Absolutely. You know, I think there is a tendency for us to limit the range of emotions that are allowed in the workplace. And I think that suppresses something of our life energy. And that's why I'm curious about anger for myself, because it's a life force. It's a really clear way of saying no. And as a human, I should know that I can say no to things.
Yeah, and I get that, and I think you picked up on some really good points there. It's about, but I'm literally thinking about what you just said, so hence the reason that you can see me looking off into the distance. But I think there's something in the boundary setting and that saying no, but I suppose it's about catching it at a point before it gets to that place of explosion, right? So it's catching it before it gets to that. But I'm really happy that you mentioned that, about that kind of rupture and repair, because I do think sometimes getting to that rupture, and I'll be really honest about it, you know, I had a rupture within my team the other day, and I think and that's just part of being human, right? You know, with all the will in the world, you can't avoid those things, and you shouldn't avoid those things, because lack of confrontation and stuff is not great either. You know, but equally it's about what happens after, because actually what happens after can make a relationship even better. You know, I think that's the really important thing.
I had a similar thing with someone, and it actually was quite transformative once we pushed through. And I think it goes a bit to your point about EQ. I think a lot of people are scared of conflict, and I think that they avoid it because it can bring up a lot of stuff, and it can bring up a lot of stuff from families and the like. But I think if we can reframe the idea that conflict can also be like be the foundation, if you like, of transformational growth in our relationships, it could be a lot more welcome than it. I think people kind of steer clear of it and are afraid of it, and I get why. I'm not great with conflict, but I'm trying really hard to understand other people's perspectives. And I think, you know, only when we can do that will we fully get to the bottom of some of the bigger issues that we're facing in organizations around diversity and inclusion.
And I think that, you know, and it's also, if you can have conflict and no, it ain't just going to go to DEFCON 5 and everything's going to fall to pieces. You know, you're talking there about quite a child, and I mean this kindly. You know, it's a childish view of, oh my God, it's all going to blow up and we're never going to be able to deal with it. you know, I think that's the point, isn't it? I think if we know that we can have conflict, and then as a consequence of that have the tools to be able to deal with it, suddenly the conflict isn't so scary. And it's just you know, with all of these things, it's the emotion that we attach to it that makes it feel bigger than it actually is. It's just another stage. Do you know what I mean? It's just another stage. It's what we place on it that makes it bigger or smaller, right?
I think it's also, I think your word childish, I think is true. I think when we have experiences as little people of being in conflict, and actually that's quite often a parent or a caregiver saying no, or giving, like the adult-child dynamic, it's very difficult for a child to express frustration, articulate, you know, their emotional landscape. But a lot of us, and I'll own this myself, came from a childhood where my father in particular ruled the roost. And so it was never modeled for me that we could work our way through something, because I was a child, he was the adult, and that was that. So we've kind of, you know, put me in an older body, I'm still holding some childlike memory of what it means to be in conflict.
No, I get it.
And when your caregiver turns away from you because you've upset them, it's the most painful,
terrifying. No, I get it. And I think, and maybe what we're saying there as well is that the old organizational model replicated that parent-child dynamic, right? And actually I think that's what's quite interesting. I really think at the moment that there is an element with this democracy of voices that's happening now, that we're moving out of that. Well, on one hand, I say it feels like we're moving out into adult, but they're not. But then actually, there is still this parent-child dynamic when, when there feels like there's a great expectation on employees for employers to do X, Y, Z. So there's a real tension there going on between the two things. I don't know. And I think that ultimately getting to that place of empowerment where there is the adult dynamic is the ideal, but that requires leaders to be less fearful of giving up that control, I guess.
And I think it's also looking at systemic constructs, i.e., you know, what is the organization as a whole? How might that be playing into that whole dynamic? And I think that then dilutes the sense of it's all on one or two people to fix themselves, if that makes sense. I think organizations, and understandably their scale at which they're growing and the scale at which they're facing challenges they've never faced before, it makes sense. But I think that if we can look at the lens of any challenge that's facing an organization through the individual, the team, and the actual organization itself, we have an opportunity to really get to the heart of the problem and make the right interventions at that point. Whereas I think we've been, over the years, over the last, I don't know, I'm in my 50s, but for many years, it's the emphasis is very much on self-help. You know, the individual needs to do the work, you know, go to therapy, do the work. And I get that, but I also feel that there's a responsibility at the organizational level to look at the contribution that it culturally is making. And I think we're seeing that shift now with organizations saying, okay, we have a part to play in this, and we need to look at how we support the right intervention.
Well, I mean, that brilliant that piece written recently by Forbes, you know, your leader is 70% more responsible for the impact on your mental health than anyone else in your life. And it's just like, you know, you can't, if you keep putting someone back into the same circumstances, you know, it doesn't matter what else they're doing. I mean, of course, they should be doing, they could and should be doing things to look after themselves too. But if you're still harming them with the behaviors of the organization, then it ain't ever going to improve, right? So it's like there's a two-way street there for sure.
And I think the more mature organizations are embracing that concept and recognizing.
Are you seeing a shift?
Yeah, and I'm seeing it with, I'm seeing clients and that we work with sort of chewing on this dilemma. And I think that when we start looking at some of the interventions that are needed more at the systemic level, it's a bit like the penny drops, and they go, oh, okay. So I think there's an appetite for it. There's definitely an appetite for not seeing people in their workplace struggle so much, you know. There's a huge wave at the moment of people who just are exhausted and fatigued, and they've come through something like never before. And I see a lot of caring leaders just looking for answers and looking for help.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? But I think it also takes a brave leader to be able to ask for that help and admit that they don't have to know everything, right? Because I think that's a new thing. This is a new world, you know, and it does take a very brave leader who puts their hands up and says I don't. Karen, I've loved this. Thank you. That was a real, I think for any leader, this was a masterclass in a masterclass in how to maybe do things differently. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom in sharing that. It was a joy to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, give your dog a cuddle from me.
I will, always. Thanks.
Okay, bye.